talk about working moms and babies and all of that stuff with Lauren Smith Brody. Thank you so much for being here and writing The Fifth Trimester. All right, so I get the book and I have 3 children, all grown, daughters. The Fifth Trimester, why'd you call it that?
Oh, easy, because it is, the 5th trimester is when the working mom is born. So obviously you know what the first 3 trimesters are, that's pregnancy. The 4th trimester, as I learned when I had my first son as a newborn, is this period of time, it's 3 months before the newborn baby wakes up to the world. So you comfort a cranky baby by recreating the womb, essentially. Human babies are born 3 months too early is the theory. So that's the 4th. But I found for myself and anecdotally for all these women who I interviewed for the book that there's actually also a developmental phase that happens for mom after that. And it's the 5th trimester, and it's when you go back to work. And in the United States, it is very, very often before a woman is physically and emotionally ready to be there, and yet she's there. So how do you muddle through? That was the genesis of the book, and so I'm helping women through other women's voices in science and a huge survey I did of all kinds of moms figure out how do you get through that transition in a way that sets you up ultimately for satisfaction.
How old are your sons?
They're 6 and 9 now.
All right, so you're in the throes of little children. So I see a sequel to this as they become teenagers, because I'll tell you,
oh God help me.
That's true. You do live through it. You do live through it. You interviewed more than 700 women, all walks of life. You want other women who are working to take this and keep it around and refer back to it. What was a common thread that you heard from a lot of women? Was it the guilt of going back to work? And why do we do that to ourselves?
That's part of it, and I have very strong feelings about guilt, especially after interviewing all these women. So these were women who were from all walks of life, all approaches to career, all approaches to motherhood. So there were single moms, there were adoptive moms, there were gay moms, there were moms who worked part-time for themselves, full-time CEOs, hourly workers. I really tried very hard to be representative of as many different approaches as I could think of. And the big theme I actually had, so the one sort of indulgence as I was, and you know this because you've written books, as I researched my book and as I wrote it, was that I hired a transcriber. But it was so handy because I could actually look at those transcripts and I could see that the word that just popped off the page again and again and again was guilt. And everyone felt guilt, and yet here's what I discovered. It meant different things to everyone. So there were some mothers who felt guilty leaving their baby in the care of someone who they felt like might not be quite as capable as they would be themselves. There were other mothers who felt guilty going back to work and actually enjoying it. And so I really came to the idea that if we're all feeling it, why can't we just scratch it out like some common denominator? I really think this idea of mommy guilt is sexist, frankly. You don't.
But we do it to ourselves, don't you think?
And we do, yeah. I really think we're living in a time of crisis of expectations, both of ourselves at home and in the workplace. And ultimately, what ends up happening is you look in the mirror and you're not happy with yourself, and that doesn't make you a better parent. So how can we all help each other out, go through this transition, and then really take a hand and help someone behind us through it too?
Now, you're a former executive editor at Glamour magazine, so you're dealing with gorgeous, beautiful women all day long and talking about fashion. And once you have a child, you're lucky to get a shower in, you know, when the child is first born. So how do women deal with that?
Well, I actually saw some of this borne out in the surveying that I did, and I was able to see that the time they spend in the morning, you spend more time getting ready in the morning, but only half as much time on yourself. So you learn shortcuts and you figure out kind of how to prioritize what is most important to you and what makes you feel most confident. I interviewed a dermatologist who talked about, I expected her to tell me about, you know, she treats celebrities, so I expected her to tell me, you know, all of the expensive products that you need, and she said, no, you know what you really need to do? You need to stay hydrated, and you need to wash off your makeup at the end of the day, because then your skin will be healthy, and if your skin is healthy, you need less makeup in the morning, and then it takes less time.
Where was she when I needed her?
I know, right? She's amazing.
Because you hear that now, it's like, hydrate, hydrate.
Right.
Other secrets that you learned from women who are going back to work with young children?
So one of the biggest things that women deal with, obviously, and men too, new dads as well, is sleep deprivation. So the moms who I surveyed said that on average, I asked them when they started sleeping through the night. So not when did your baby start sleeping through the night, but when did you start getting, and this is, you know, a conservative approach to what's a good night's sleep, at 7 hours straight in a row. And it was at the 7-month mark. So at that point, most of these women had been back at work for months. So my approach was actually not how do you get your baby to sleep, but I decided to call up adult sleep experts and ask them, you know, what can you do to make sure that what little sleep you're getting is really good quality, and then are there ways to kind of game your day, your work day, to take advantage of the times in the day when you're going to be most alert, and how do you get through that, you know, post lunch slump that everybody feels, but that you feel really
Candy
intensely.
bars.
No, seriously, I swear to God, the sleep expert said to me, coffee is not a bad idea. And you know, she was really honest.
When I had 3 children under the age of 4, I was mainlining coffee.
Oh, yeah.
And I went back to work 6 weeks after my twins were born.
Oh, my God.
And as you
That's amazing.
right, and I
Yeah.
don't remember driving home. But as you point out, in European countries, they don't do that, especially in Sweden, where the men get to take off. I think it might be a year.
Yeah.
And they just figure out how that's going to go. Are you working full time now with 2 children?
So I now work for myself. So I technically do work probably about 40 hours a week, but they're flexible hours. And actually, I am not in the millennial generation, but I have discovered through all of my interviewing of these women that my experience is actually kind of normal now. So, you know, there are a lot of women who will have 2 hours in the middle of the day where they do something for their family, but then they are absolutely logging back on at 8:32 p.m. after the kids are asleep and working for 2 more hours.
It's work-life balance, which I think your generation, maybe behind you, is sort of figuring out. In talking to these women, all right, they have the child at home, they figure out babysitting, whatever they're going to do. Now, does the boss understand what it is to be a working mother, and what if they don't have children?
Well, this is interesting. So I had some of my own biases, I will absolutely admit, coming into reporting this book. I worked at a place that was actually quite supportive of women, largely because it was a staff of many, many women. So I knew that was one bias that I had, and that I would have to be really open to interviewing women who had, you know, male bosses, for instance, or people of a different generation that might not have had similar experiences. But what I found was that some of the assumptions we make about our supervisors are wrong. So there actually was not much of a difference between genders. The women who had female bosses were not markedly happier than the women who had male bosses. Same statistic for bosses who had children versus not having children. In some ways, the ones that didn't have children were actually a little bit more generous in their assumptions of what these women could handle coming back to work. I think they knew that for not having experienced it themselves, they were going to give them the benefit of the doubt that this was really, really hard, as opposed to someone who had been through it and maybe had buried some of those memories.
What did you learn from writing your own book?
Oh my gosh, I learned so much from it. So my oldest is 9, as I said, so I'm in my 50th trimester. And
wow, we're keeping track.
Yes, sorry.
Don't
do the math.
Yeah, right.
Don't do the math.
I was thinking, oh my gosh, my oldest is 31.
It made me feel really old. But I will say, so what I learned is that transition is transition. All the same, kind of no matter when it is. This is the first major one that a lot of women go through. And if you can see it both as a challenge and as something to be really transparent about in the workplace, and then still get your job done, you will learn from it, you will look back on it and see that you made it through. What I was going to say is that, so I'm in my 50th trimester, but I am moving from an industry where, you know, there's a masthead in the front of a magazine, and you can see where you stand, who's above you, who's beneath you. You hold the product in your hands at the end of the day. This is a book, and I can hold it, but I also have launched a whole consulting agency around helping companies do a better job of supporting new parents. That's a lot harder to quantify. So I find myself in a major career transition too, and I find myself leaning on so many of the lessons that these women I interviewed shared about how do you change the way you see yourself as you transition into something that is really gratifying for you in your career. How do you balance work and family and make it something that doesn't necessarily make you happy, but makes you at least satisfied.
So do you want to work with big corporations?
I do, yeah, and I'm
okay,
starting
so
to.
who has called you?
So I went in and spoke at Facebook. I talked.
Good for them.
Oh, they're amazing. They're so, well, so what I found, to be totally honest, is that there are a lot of companies that are really, really committed to doing a great job for families. And so they have these policies on paper, and Facebook does a really good job beyond what's on paper. But so they have these policies, but then they are also the companies, they're so elite that they attract these women who are such go-getters that they have the highest expectations of themselves. And when they come back from their 6-month paid leave, So much has changed.
Is that what they get?
At Facebook, they do, yes, which is phenomenal. But many
Who else
of them
gives 6 months leave?
Well, so Amazon, this was just reported by the Seattle, it's not a new policy, but there was a long story in the Seattle Times this morning about it, about how Amazon gives 20 weeks of paid leave. But then the thing that I think they're really, really doing right is that they are also offering 6 weeks when you come back where you can choose to work part-time. And so that is those parents' 5th trimester, and that's the time when they might need to go from something other than 0 to 100, but dip a toe back in, get comfortable with their child care situation, have their baby get a little bit older and be sitting up at daycare instead of lying down in the in the little bouncy seat.
This is tougher for mid-sized companies and small businesses.
Yes, it is. But I will say, so Amazon is huge. It's a behemoth, but they have also managed to offer this exact same benefit to their fulfillment center workers, their hourly workers. Everyone is entitled to this.
Interesting.
Which is unprecedented.
Now, you said you were working on another book, but it's not a sequel to this.
Oh, no.
So you're going to go from this to a novel.
Oh, that's my side project. Yes.
Well, but you hope to sell it.
Yes, I do. I do hope to sell it. And it is, it's funny, the work that drives me is so much about parenthood, and I think that a lot of working moms feel that way. And there is just this, and so one of the themes of the novel is obviously about raising children. And a lot of the women I spoke to said that when they come back from their leave after having a baby, they just feel such need to find meaning in their work. And so what I learned in interviewing these women is that it doesn't necessarily have to be that they are now changing careers entirely and going to work for Sesame Street. I mean, that would be great.
You are a new person after you give birth. I mean, you find out a lot about yourself.
But it can also be, maybe you go back to work at your job creating widgets, and the widgets don't inspire you that much, but the people you work with, particularly the women who are coming up underneath you, need mentoring. And one thing that you can do to really help them and also help yourself feel satisfaction in a time when you may be a little bit at sea is to share with them some of your experiences about bridging, work and home, and being honest about it.
You also get into breastfeeding. You also talk about postpartum.
Yes, yes.
And that's a good thing, because a lot of women experience that and they think they're the only one. What did you find out from these 700 moms?
Just how incredibly common it is. And the statistics say it's 1 in 7 women who experience a postpartum mood disorder. It's a lot, and I think it's actually a lot higher. The statistic is actually more like 1 in 4 when you account for extenuating circumstances. So if someone has lost a job, if someone is a single mother, if someone has a sick baby, your chances are much higher. And what I found anecdotally is I think it is even higher than that. You talk to these women who are going back to work before they feel emotionally ready to be there, and it's not helping. It's not helping the baby, it's not helping them, and sometimes, as little as 2 additional weeks would really make all the difference in the world.
And you're exhausted too.
Yes.
And babies do not come with manuals. You have to figure it out on your own, and each one of them is very, very different.
Yeah.
Breastfeeding, what did you find out from the moms in going back to work?
So what I found out is, again, there are a lot of workplaces that have really good intentions, that will set up a pumping space for moms. I was talking to a woman who worked at a bank who told me about how they had hired a professional decorator to come in and appoint the beautiful mother's nursing room with a pumping room, and it had a view over, this landmark in New York. Anyway, nobody could use it because it was up an elevator bank that took too far to walk to. So when you actually break it down, women are spending, typically they pump, those who are pumping full-time, and there's obviously myriad approaches to this, and whatever you choose, whatever way you choose to feed your baby is great by me. But the women who were pumping, on average, reported 3 times a day, and it took them 22 minutes to pump the milk, but it also took them an additional 20 minutes each session to get to the place where they could pump, to set up, to wash the parts, to transfer their stuff into the pouch and out of the pouch. That's the stuff that businesses can really, really help with. Then the other issue is that there's a stigma around it, of course. And this was easier for me at Glamour Magazine because I could absolutely say, hey guys, can we end the meeting? I gotta go pump. That was fine. You could talk about your breasts.
And that's unusual. Yeah.
And it's very unusual. And so the stigma issue is that if you're able to, actually work when you do your pumping, and then be a little Beyonce about it and say like, hey, look what I did, that will actually help change people's, idea of what's going on in there. You know,
Right.
when you are closing an office door, you're going
It's just
into
part of
another-
life, but you're right, it's
Exactly.
secretive.
But
right?
I found, you know, if there's good Wi-Fi, if you're able to, when I went into, I was at the Instagram office and they had, the chairs actually had one of those old-fashioned, do you remember from grade school with the desk that would fold up and then
sure.
down? So they had those. And women didn't have to work while they were pumping, but if they wanted to, they could. And in my experience, I found that really helpful to have that captive time, you know, 3 times a day when I could get through emails.
And if you have a happy mom that's working,
Yeah.
then that makes everything a lot better. In your wildest imagination, maybe plan this out because you seem pretty analytical to me, but did you think you were going to leave Glamour magazine and write such a book? I mean, was this already in your head when you were there?
It was definitely ticking away, and I had the term actually in mind for a couple of years, and it was just simmering there, and I didn't have time to do anything with it. And then there was a week where on 2 different occasions, a young woman who I had hired came into me and said, I just went to my office and said, for help with some work project, and said, by the way, I just want to thank you for being so open about what's hard about being a working mom. And I'm thinking, oh my God, did I say one too many times how tired I was? You know, did I really, like, you know, did I look like did I spit up on my shirt? You know? and both of these conversations kind of went like this. Thank you for doing that. You showed me I can too. I respect you so much, even more than I ever did before. And I thought, oh, like, this is actually what I most enjoy about my job. And I think I knew at that point that whatever I did next would be something that mentored women, but that also encouraged other women to mentor other women, which I think is an instinct that is really born in you when you have a child.
Right. Some people who don't want to share don't hang out with them.
Right.
Did you have much say in the cover? Did you pick the cover?
Oh my gosh, yes. Actually, so
Really?
the cover, I have to say, the cover was designed by a man, which probably doesn't sound that crazy, except that he's a single guy, he doesn't have kids, and he came up with this concept of the check boxes. He had clearly read the book. We fiddled, you know, back and forth a little bit with what they would actually say that's checked off. You know, I'm the one who, the thank you notes, I'm the one who scratched through that and said, you know, that's my own bias, is every time I give a new mom a gift, on the card I say, if you write me a thank you note, I will actually spend the 10 minutes with your baby, please, you know. So it was a collaboration, but I love the color. I love that when I walk into a bookstore, it jumps out at me.
Well, that's the key. Red and yellow, power colors. I can't thank you enough for doing this for moms and giving them a guide. And as I said to you, my daughter, who was going to give birth in November, was reading this like crazy as she tries to figure out how to go back to work and juggle everything that women do.
Well, she's got a great example to follow.
Well, one day at a time. Lauren, thanks so much for coming on. I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Ann.
When this in, who is this girl? Spend all night kissing, and if Walter's right here, then who else is missing? Got a little sidetracked to find myself wishing I found the keys to the door, but it's also a metaphor. Need to keep locked in the grocery store, but mine just to save time. Skip right ahead to the last ride.